The year 2024 was filled with way more Disney Lorcana than I think any of us really believed would be possible. We started the year with nothing but third-party tournaments that led into some of the largest events to date for Disney Lorcana. 10 Disney Lorcana challenges was phenomenal to see in our first full year of competitive organized play. But with that were lots and lots of phenomenal wins by decks designed by incredible players. Today, I wanted to go through, for one last time, the best decks of 2024. Let's get into them. Rob Serpay showed up to Star City Games Hartford with a deck that, quite frankly, nobody saw coming. The truth to be told about this list is that through the entirety of the Rise of the Floodborns metagame, we'd only seen the rise of Ruby Amethyst and Amber Steel Flutes. These were the two decks that were very incredibly dominant, with a shed of Sapphire Steel Wheel as well. But when Rob showed up to this 128-player tournament in Hartford, Connecticut, he came to play with a deck that very clearly no one was prepared for. Everyone believed at the time that Amethyst Amber was the best aggro deck. Rob came out and showed everyone that they were wrong, and he was one step ahead of the metagame itself. A great pickup win by Rob Serpay here, and a phenomenal display of how, when given enough time within a particular metagame, any deck can rise to the top and pick up a win when it's least expected. A few weeks later, Into the Inklands was released, and Ruby Amethyst came back out on top. George G of Team TFM picked up the win at a 175-player tournament in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Ruby Amethyst deck was very interesting because even though in Into the Inklands locations were revealed and the Queen's Castle was all the rage and all the conversation of talk, our deck that weekend decided to not play the Queen's Castle, instead having more answers to respond to our opponent's Queen's Castles. Along with Pinocchio still being a threat to the metagame, there are lots of great cards that came out within Into the Inklands, and the locations splattered also gave birth to a lot of new concepts within how to win games in Disney Lorcana. A card like Maui's Hook was phenomenal. A card like the Sorcerer's Spellbook was a necessary evil. Rafiki was a great new addition to these lists as well, to pair with Pinocchio. All in all, this was one of the more interesting ways to start a metagame because this tournament took place just 1 week after the release of Into the Inklands, which was a phenomenal way to start off a new metagame and really making an impact early as to what decks will be the true players within it. A few weeks later, Reclam took down a 247-player tournament as well with Ruby Amethyst. Obviously, this list was a bit different, still focused around having hooks and even spellbooks, but the Queen's Castle was too good to be true, and in all honesty, I think most of us caught on to that during the Into the Inklands metagame. Queen's Castle was just too good not to play. The other strange addition here, which is the true reason for this list to be added, is Maui Wow. This is a card that did not take off after this particular rendition of Ruby Amethyst was successful in this large tournament, but it was notable that in a big tournament like this, having Maui the Wow be able to clear multiple castles, being able to clear multiple things similar to a Scar would be, but also be inkable, was the true note. So although this was the only time to shine for the Wow, still very notable that Reclam was able to pick up a win. Then brought in SCG Atlanta, which the 5K winner was Ryan Miles. This was the first and definitely not the last time we will see Emerald Steel take down a tournament of this stature. Picking up a win in a 5K tournament while also going completely undefeated during that tournament. We actually interviewed Ryan after this event, and there's a full interview of him on here. It's one of the most successful interviews on the channel. But it's discussing what it took for Emerald Steel to finally pick up a huge win in a large tournament. To this point, Ruby Amethyst and Amethyst Steel were the only ones seeing true success at high levels in 2024. So to come in and be a brand new deck without Amethyst cards and find a way to go undefeated on a weekend to pick up multiple wins is very impressive, to say the least. It was the first nail in the coffin to turn the tides of showcasing that there are other options that can win large events within Disney Lorcana. Huge shout out again to Ryan Miles to be the trend center that will later lead to be one of the most successful decks of 2024, which is, of course, Emerald Steel. After 3 successful events for SCG, a few successful events for CCS, PPG running more successful events in 2023 than they did in the early 2024, it was finally time to showcase what Disney Lorcana can really do. Ravensburger decided to host DLCs. There were 10 of them this year, which is insane. This first opening weekend came with 2 across the globe of each 2,000 players, which is actually crazy for Disney Lorcana to say that in their opening weekend of competitive organized play, they put 4,000 players in the room, and honestly, more as attendees. Easy to say that there were well over 5,000 Disney Lorcana players in one weekend across 2 different places of the globe. Let's take a look at this deck. Joshua picked up a surprising victory with Amber Amethyst. This is the only time we'll see Amber Amethyst on this list as picking up one of the most ridiculously large wins in history of Disney Lorcana. To say that they won the first North American Disney Lorcana Challenge, and not even knowing at the time, also picking up one of the first invites to the Worlds for Disney Lorcana, is incredible to say the least. But to add on the fact that they won it with cards that would never see the light of day again is all the more impressive. Again, this metagame was the Into the Inklands metagame. It was the very last weekend in which Into the Inklands would be played in this stature, because just a few weeks later, we will be for the release of Ursula's Return and a brand new set of cards. Joshua came in with a very unique deck designed around Perdita and Fairy Godmother. Of course, utilizing Cinderella to exert things down, make the trades when necessary, Perdita consistently bringing back powerful characters like Piglet, and even cards like Cusco or Madame Mim to kind of keep the trend moving forward. Utilizing cards like Peter Pan's Shadow and Mufasa, this deck had a very interesting take on the current metagame that was Into the Inklands. And not only was it interesting, it found him in a way to take down the first DLC in North America. I'd love to know, what was your best deck this year? Honestly, hit me up in the comments and let me know, what deck were you most successful with this year? For me, definitely Amethyst Steel. In 3 different DLCs, I played Amethyst Steel to Let It Go, which was great. Recently, I've been playing an Amethyst Steel at the CCS, which I started and went undefeated in that tournament playing it. For me, that color combination just makes the most sense. I think it's a great support to one another, and I've just really enjoyed playing, whether it was mid-range, control, or even aggro. There was even a time in Rise of the Floodborn metagame where it was just like a Floodborn Matters deck with Blue Fairy and things like that. I also played Blue Fairy in DLC Atlanta, the tournament we just covered, to a 98th place finish. So I loved Amethyst Steel. Definitely my favorite in combination of 2024. We'll see if that kind of moves over into 2025. But definitely let me know in the comments, what's your favorite deck of 2024? The other player to pick up their Worlds invite that weekend was Frank Karsten. Frank played an Amber Steel Flutes deck, which was the first of its kind to be successful in 2024. Flutes was a deck that won the first ever competitive tournament at PAX Unplugged 2023, but after that was able to find its way to win more games against and in bigger tournaments. So the idea that Frank came in with this Amber Steel Songs deck, featuring flutes, featuring Cinderella Stouthearter, featuring the Queen, Piglet, utilizing Into the Inklands a little bit more, being slightly more aggressive, has a lot to say about it. Frank is a pro Magic player that came in with the concept of utilizing this deck very similar to how certain Magic decks played. And it worked out perfectly. Picking up a win in a 2,047 player tournament in Lille was an incredible start to Frank's Lorcana career. I think this was a wonderful win, and honestly, it was a showcase on a weekend with 4,000 players that Amber Amethyst can come in and be off meta and win a Disney Lorcana challenge, and then Amber Steel can come in, be a little less talked about at the time. There were lots of other decks. This was definitely not one of the favorite decks, I would say, or the most popular decks going into these weekends. So the idea that 2 decks can win Disney Lorcana challenges in the opening weekend showcases that the moment you give organized play a true meaning, that the best players will come out and showcase their skills and deck creation designs. And that's what we had this weekend, showcasing that, hey, any deck played by the right player in the right metagame has the ability to win a Disney Lorcana challenge. Frank is definitely a player I would love to sit down and talk to in an interview. It's phenomenal watching him play whenever he's on stream. Huge shout out again to picking up a Worlds invite in your very first opportunity. Now, let's talk about the summer of Bucky. R.I.P. Bucky. Brian picked up the first win of the Ursula's Return metagame in a 967-player event in DLC Chicago. This was the first time that we had got to see Diablo hit tables along with comboing with Bucky. That's right, this little terror of a squirrel used to be a 2-cost, inkable, 1 strength, 1 willpower with 1 lore, and it was just whenever you played a Floodborn character, your opponent was forced to discard a card. This was the first erotic card in Disney Lorcana, and it was likely because of the honest frustration amongst players within Disney Lorcana. The idea that on turn 2, we could play a Bucky, and in that same exact turn, we could shift into a Diablo, removing one of our opponent's cards from their hand, and then have the ability to even sing a Let the Storm Rage On or a Strength of a Raging Fire to remove another character, or when in doubt, also singing a Sudden Chill to remove a second card. The clear frustration from negative play experience with this deck led to the inevitable errata of Bucky himself. But this was definitely the first of many wins for Emerald Steel with the combination of Diablo. Diablo, Ursula, just really true forces to be reckoned with, and the idea that we can continuously just play banger after banger and just force our opponents to answer everything while taking cards out of their hand as an additional free resource just from playing the card really turned games upside down very quickly. All in all, Brian capitalized on this opportunity, winning the DLC and earning his spot in Worlds of next year. A few weeks later, DLC Bochum took place, and this was a very interesting weekend for the Europeans, because what it did is that it had a 960-player tournament on day 1, another 960-player tournament on day 2, and then they had those 2 top 32s play off to win, to declare the winner of DLC Bochum. Just a few weeks later, though, Raven Mask came in, also showcasing a first-place finish in the day 1 events with Emerald Steel, just further securing the dominance of what this deck is possible of in large events. Although he didn't go on to win that tournament because Theotime picked up the win with Ruby Amethyst. While Bucky was a true threat, that always brings the idea that you can prepare and plan for that as best as possible. What Ruby Amethyst players realized, even in Chicago, if I might be honest, is that there was a plan and strategy of how to compete against this deck. And really what it was the idea that every single card you played had to either replace itself, or you had to understand that it wasn't worth playing the card in that matchup, because the only thing that was important was getting to AB prepared. So cards like Turnabox Follower is fine because you can kind of pop it and draw your cards back, but it was not good if your opponent started with Diablo. If your opponent went turn 1 Diablo, you had to just ink cards. You had to ink your Turnabogs, you had to ink your Snake. You just had to get to turn 3 so you can play Maleficent, which is just putting a body in play for them to take out anyway. But what it does is enables you to draw a card, play a rabbit, draw a card. Then on turns 5 and 6, you can start fighting back to make sure you don't lose in lore race. But realistically, it was just to get 2-for-1s out of the deal. So cards like Maui and Medusa were very good because they could come in, take out the biggest threat, and then kind of just stave off a little bit and live. But then really all the deck was about was turn 7, be prepared, and you had a way to answer the Bucky metagame. There's also came with new cards like Be King Undisputed, which created one of the more powerful lines as well. Now this deck had, Turnabox on 1, Flint on turn Flynn on 2, Sisu on 3, and then a card like Goat on 4, which then on turn 5, you can all of a sudden sing Be King Undisputed, play a castle, bring a card to the castle, and you were just off to the races running, and finally had a way to just like dominate the game through and through. All in all, huge shout out to Theotime picking up a win here. Just a few weeks after that at DLC Fort Worth, Ed also picked up a win with the inevitable Ruby Amethyst list. There was a little bit of difference here. I kind of want to showcase both of these decks so you can see how close they were in realism, but there's definitely choices made here. A few weeks later, with Ed winning, he decided to go with 8 1-drops, where Theotime only had 4. Ed also liked Sisu a bunch, where Theotime liked Be King Undisputed. But aside from that, these lists are pretty close. Obviously, Peter Pan Shadow up at the top there. But realistically, these lists were very, very tight, very, very close, and winning tournaments of like stature. So the idea that we were able to bring, mostly the same version of Ruby Amethyst to back-to-back DLCs and win and go on runs to back-to-back DLCs showcases the power of Ruby Amethyst and realism, the power of Amethyst. At the end of the day here, you're talking about now having 3 DLC winners played with the Amethyst Inc. combination. Huge shout out to Theo and Ed, each picking up Worlds invites in July this year. Finally, Sapphire gets on the board at DLC Bologna. Ellie picked up an incredible win with a deck that truly turned heads. This deck, when you first looked at it, you're like, man, Ruby Sapphire is cool, but this is not at all the Ruby Sapphire that we've been playing with and playing against. Adding Maurice's Workshop for the one and only time that it was successful this year, and then showcasing the power of just distributing items after items to get the most out of your Tamatoa for really, really big lore gains with Lucky Dime. This list was incredibly well designed and incredibly well positioned at the end of a metagame. Picking up a big win, 1,866 player tournament, huge shout out, and getting your Worlds invite. So let's talk about the DLC that was in Toronto. This is one of the more interesting DLCs this year because it was legitimately a format for one weekend. So Bucky was errataed, which was great, but the interesting thing here is that Shimmering Skies was released but not legal, but this was in between Bochum and now Toronto, where Bucky was errataed here but not there. So this is officially an event for one single weekend where we played in a world with just sets 1 through 4 and Bucky'd errataed. So because of that, Emerald Steel was off the table. There's just nobody going to play Emerald Steel without Bucky in this metagame. And if you did, it was a way less powerful deck. So all in all, this was the list that ended up winning. Shout out to Diego here, picking up the win in a 960 player tournament at DLC Toronto with Amber Emerald. Now this list was one of the better decks within the set 4 metagame. The problem was it couldn't beat Bucky efficiently. So the idea that it couldn't beat Bucky efficiently really just held this deck down because Bucky was being played in such large numbers. So the moment that you removed Bucky Emerald Steel from the equation, this deck instantly shot up to being one of the better decks and honestly one of the more played decks in Toronto. Obviously, this one hurts me a little bit because he did end up beating David Nunez, my teammate, in the finals, which was honestly a great clash, 3 games to the fight. But Diego picked up the win, and in a really interesting manner because this was the only time that this deck was at its peak and at its most success. So it's really great to see a deck like this, kind of even like the idea that we had a format like that, a one weekend format where this was relevant and we still had 1,000 people come out and bring their best efforts and have a new deck showcased and win a Disney Lorcana challenge. Huge shout out to you, Diego. Congrats again on your Worlds invite. We go back to Birmingham, and Ruby Sapphire, in a more traditional manner, comes away to pick up a victory. This is the same exact weekend as DLC Vegas, and Ruby Sapphire was a pretty high priority player in Vegas as well, but this list on that day in Birmingham was one of the better decks in the room. Really played well throughout the tournament. When I went back and watched it, it was great. And seeing a deck like this showcase Mufasa from Shimmering Skies, along with cards like Great Stone Dragon and Fang Crossbow, followed by the recent addition of Vision of the Future, the deck really did seem like a powerhouse to come in the Shimmering Skies metagame, and it remained that way as one of the most played decks throughout the next several Disney Lorcana challenges. That same weekend, we had 1,904 players at DLC Vegas, and Zan Syad picked up the win with Emerald Steel. This isn't the first time Zan was successful this year, as he had won a CCS in the year, which was around 200 plus players as well. But this was the first time that we had seen Zan truly take home a large Lorcana tournament. He also finished in top 4 of DLC Atlanta. So it's really easy to say that Zan has been one of the more successful players in Disney Lorcana this year. Having a win, a top 4, a CCS win as well, it's really hard to say that there was a player that had more success than Zan. But picking up this DLC win in Vegas in a 1,904 player tournament, getting his Worlds invite, and showcasing that Emerald Steel, even without Bucky, was a true threat. Adding cards like Anna from Shimmering Skies was massive. The addition of Pete was also very powerful, along with understanding now that the idea that this list can have a turn 1 Diablo, turn 2 Morph, which then enables a turn 3 Beast Tragic Hero with a Shift Diablo, or just the idea that you can shift Beast on 3 and have an Ursula the following turn, having lines like Diablo into Morph, into Shift Diablo, into PJ. All of these things are very, very powerful and was one of the more standpoints through the rest of the year in Disney Lorcana, showcasing how good Emerald Steel can be. Huge shout out again to Zan for picking up his Worlds invite. Just a few short weeks later, at DLC Vegas, 1,893 player, good friend Luke Wonderland Goldwyn picked up a win with Emerald Steel as well, showcasing that in back-to-back months, Emerald Steel was able to pick up a victory in Disney Lorcana challenges, along with the third of 6 DLCs won by Emerald Steel this year. Very similar, same concept, very small changes within the deck itself, showcasing that Emerald Steel was a force to be reckoned with in Vegas and remains so in Seattle. Huge shout out again to Luke for picking up this win and getting his Worlds invite as well. Move on to Domingo winning the EU Continental Championship with Ruby Amethyst in the first events with Azurite Sea legal. The addition of Genie Wish Fulfilled is a phenomenal Amethyst trait, and it really unlocked the ability to play cards like Elsa and Belle. These 3 cards in Amethyst have created the Amethyst core to be even larger. Knowing that you have Snake, Fox, Goat, Rabbit, Genie, Elsa, Belle, and friends just means that you have some of the most powerful cards in Disney Lorcana. All of these cards play a pivotal role in this deck's success, and it has remained so even into this past weekend, where it picked up another win in a 95-player tournament as well. Ruby Amethyst has just been dominant from start to finish this year, winning one of the first events of the year and then finishing out with winning the biggest and most impactful Lorcana tournament to date, EU Continental Championship. Huge shout out to Domingo again for picking up this win and his Worlds invite as well. A few weeks after that, DeCandio picked up a win in a 290-player tournament at a CCS 10K with Amber Steel Mines. This aggro deck is a very different take than the traditional Songs versions with a whole new world. This is really just a pedal to the metal list with, by design, utilizing cards like Mines, Happy, and even Docks to continue the way to remove characters from the board that consisted of not having to flat out pay to do so. Getting the most out of your characters, similar to how singers work in Lorcana, utilizing a singer 1 like Cinderella to sing songs that cost 3 is a really powerful way to get ahead on the board, similar to how Sapphire ramps to more ink. Utilizing cards like Singer, utilizing the location like Mines to simply play a character, move a character to it, protecting the Mines by removing opposing characters is a big deal in trying to finish out games, gaining conditional lore, while keeping characters in play, moving the game forward, and not having to rely on paying out to play non-character cards that do not gain you lore. The addition of Kita is, I think, one of the most conversational ones There's a lot of players that love Kita, a lot of players that dislike Kita. Whether or not it will remain to be the best, 5-cost card for this deck, I think will be one of the bigger topics in 2025. But all the while, adding Lilo, Escape Artist, was another big deal as well. This just added the reach that this deck needed. For so long, the deck relied on cards like Flute or additional locations to try and tic-tac its way to a victory in certain matchups. Now, the recurring version of Lilo to simply just always put a 2-lore threat into play is pretty phenomenal. Adding a card like Kita or like Zimba or like Sven as a way to ready it is an option, but it's not as reliable. Kita being a 5-cost way to come in and protect your best opening hands is the reason why the card found its home. Also, Pluto is another Azurite Sea edition as a big bodyguard to protect your best opening lines also. All in all, Decandio pick up a huge win in a 219-player tournament, and it was one of the biggest tournaments to end the year that really gave him the reason for putting Amber Steel back on the map as one of the decks to focus around going into the North American Continental Championship. I didn't cover every deck that's right here, but you can see that Emerald Steel and Ruby Amethyst stole the show in 2024, picking up some of the more big wins in big tournaments all over the globe and consistently showing up in large numbers by being played by players, successful in day 2s and DLCs, top 8s, things like that. If I really went to the depths of showcasing the amount of these decks in top 8s, they would definitely still be winning across the board. But also nice to see that in large tournament this year, Amethyst Steel, Amethyst Amber, and Amber Emerald all picked up wins. Very nice to see that Amber Steel and Ruby Sapphire did find its way to pick up several wins as well. All in all, it was a really great year for 2024. We started the year not even knowing that we would have official organized play to the stature that we did. There's a good chance that we might not have gotten it until, August or September of 2024. Instead, we got it in May, and we got it strong. 10 Disney Lorcana challenges that were, brought to us out of nowhere. Did not expect them at all. It was great to play in them. I played in all 6 of the North American ones. My best finish was 71st place, which was great. And no, it wasn't my goal, but hey, to say that I picked up 3 Let It Goes this year, that's all I can really ask for. Would I love to make a day 2, make a run? Yeah, of course I would. But hey, here we are. We still supported the game. We love the game. And we, 3 Let It Goes. I mean, it could have been worse, guys. Let's be honest. Huge shout out to Ravensburger for honestly giving us the ability to have this much Disney Lorcana in our opening year. You're talking like 14,000 registered players in 10 DLCs or whatever the number was. It was some crazy number of Lorcana players that participated in these challenges, which is just phenomenal that's what we got in 2024. This speaks very largely for 2025. We started out the year with NACC, which has 1,000 players playing for 32 spots in an LCQ system. And then right off the gate, we have DLC Australia. So we already know the start of this year, we have 2 large events, hoping, and I hope that we get even more in 2025, but 2024 was a huge success for competitive Disney Lorcana, and it was really great to be a part of it, to follow it, to play in it, to cover it for you guys. It was just honestly all I could have asked for out of 2024, and Ravensburger, really pushing us into greater pastures and saying, hey, we're here to participate. We're here to make DLCs as good as they can be. A huge shout out to Fanfinity and PPG for running a phenomenal show at them. The one thing, of course, I can ask for is let's get that judge program going for 2025. I think the majority of us as players, even the majority of judges, they would really love an official judge program. I hope that's on the docket for season 2 of DLCs. Technically, Australia is still a part of season 1 because it's giving Worlds invites and not Continentals invites. So right now we still have a little bit of time. I do expect it to be maybe a little bit slower in North America and EU to start the year. And we might see like another foreign DLC or something like that in March. I'm not, I don't know, but that's my speculation, is that we're going to have a little bit of time off in the States, is my guess. So during that time, get the judge program running. That would be like priority 1. Obviously, priority 1 is just like make more DLCs, but making DLCs better by having official judge system, I think that's where we need to be in 2025. I hope you guys enjoyed this day. Again, let me know in the comments, what was your best deck of 2024? It was really great participating, meeting so many of you in 2024. I look forward to coming and being there for the LCQs at Continentals, and also just being a participant on the weekend. Saying that I was in the room when the Continental Championship was crowned really means a lot to me. I put a lot of my life and invested a lot of time into Disney Lorcana this year as a creator, as a player, and it's been, absolutely worth it. So thank you guys all so much for watching the video today. If you haven't yet, smash the like button for me. If you're new here, hit that subscribe. And of course, I will see you guys next year.